Okay, this video is going to show you how to make paper beads, what you'll need and what I'm using for my paper beads. You can use any type of printed paper. I'm using 12 by 12 inch scrapbooking paper, but you can use magazines, you can use newspapers, wrapping paper, just about anything. So this can be a great recycled art project, recycled jewelry project. What you do is you cut your paper. Well, there's several different ways that you can cut your paper depending on the shape of the bead that you want. To make a bead that is this shaped, you would want to cut your triangle shape so it's very long with one short edge and two very long edges. So whatever length of your paper. So it's very long, comes to a very thin point. Also what you'll need to use, you can use a clay needle tool, or you can use a quilling tool, or I like to use just an unbent paper clip as my tool that I'm going to wrap around, because that makes a very nice small hole that I can string either my elastic cording or regular jewelry wire through to make whatever piece of jewelry I'm going to make with my beads in the end. Also then, you'll need a glue stick. Any old regular glue stick will work, just as long as you're generous with applying it. And then you'll need some kind of a clear coat to protect your beads and make them look glassy from the paper to looking like this. You can use Mod Podge, you can use clear fingernail polish, or I like to use embossing powder and embossing ink with a heat gun. And I apply a couple of layers to that, and I'll show you that in just a moment. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to roll my paper to make the bead shape. Now if you wanted to have a straight bead without this curved part on it, you could just cut your paper into long thin rectangles. You can do different shapes. You could do even narrower triangles than this to get narrower beads. Really the sky's the limit. Use your imagination and experiment with different ways that you can create beads. The way I do it is, obviously you want to wrap the printed side so it's on the outside, and I always give the paper a little lick so it just helps it stick when I'm trying to get it started, because it is pretty tedious to get it started. And then I start rolling it around. Now if you want to get a nicely shaped bead, after the first couple of turns I just let it roll between my fingers loosely on my paper clip. I don't actually turn the paper clip. I just roll the bead between my fingers. Now as I'm doing this, I want to be careful. If I want to have a nicely evenly symmetrically shaped bead, I'm sure that I have even amounts of space on each side, because as my triangle piece of paper is getting narrower, it is making that thicker in the middle of my bead. And so it does take a little bit of time and practice if you want to be very careful with the shape of your final bead. You can adjust it a little bit, but the key is to really keep this tight as you're rolling. Now when you get to an inch and 2 inches or so left, go ahead and use your glue stick, and I just always put my finger on top of the paper and I pull the paper through. Yeah, I get a little glue on my finger, but I found that I'm pretty washable. So I just finish wrapping that up until the very end, and my tip is concealed. You really almost have to look to see exactly where the very end of it is. Then I use my clear embossing ink pad, and I'm going to get my embossing powder open here so it's ready to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just roll this bead on the embossing ink. It's going to get a little shiny so you can know that it's got a little layer on it, and then I'm going to immediately dip it into the embossing powder. And I'm going to lightly just tap off any loose pieces. You want to try to get it as evenly coated as you can, but we're going to do this a couple of times to make sure that we have a nice glossy coat. Okay, then you're going to use your heat gun, You want to remove your embossing powder away so you don't melt it. You could also cap your ink so that it stays nice and moist for you. Obviously, you want to be very careful because this tip gets very, very hot. So you want to use caution if you're using this with younger students. You turn the gun on, it'll almost instantly get hot. And you're going to just heat that. And those little crystals are going to melt, creating a glossy surface. You want to kind of keep it moving. And then I take, and off camera you can't see, but I have the embossing powder, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just dip it in there really quickly again while it's still wet, melty. And I'm going to give it another coat, and I'm going to give it even another coat, depending on where I need that gloss. I may try to get some down here at the very tip, because it doesn't look very glassy at the tip for me. You can basically build up as many layers as you want. Looks like I might have got a little too much here, so I'm going to try to melt that and manipulate it around and move it on my bead so that I can coat this other end. I wouldn't probably do as many layers as I did. There we go. Now it's kind of, now notice how it's kind of liquidy. So I do want to kind of keep it moving while it's cooling. Just kind of keep it moving. You can kind of blow on it, help it to cool. You don't really want to touch it because it is hot. It's melted, plastic basically. So you don't want to touch that, but you might want to keep it moving just a little bit. So any of those pockets where it has a little bit larger amount of the embossing ink, or excuse me, ink and powder, where it's kind of bubbling up, like there I got kind of a bigger bubble, but it is now already cool enough that I can slip it off, and now I have a bead to match my other beads. So at this point, whenever you get, depending on what you're making, if you're making a necklace, what style of necklace? Is it just going to be in a single row? So you have them like this. You can obviously place some other beads that you might have in between them. You could have them, you could put them on head pins, and you could have them hanging down as a type of a pendant, maybe with some other bead embellishments. You could do a bracelet, again, single row, maybe with some bead embellishments in between, or you can line them up this way and string your cord if you're going to have a stretchy bracelet, or your jewelry wire if you're going to have a bracelet with a clasp. But what you can do is you can then, you know, do a double weave where you go in between and back in between and back in between and back. So you have loops in between here and two cords running through. So you have like a zigzag going this way and a zigzag going this way to connect them together. So that's how you make paper beads, and some ideas as to how you might be able to use them.